tomato, based in the great city of Providence, Rhode Island. The other three panelists are Cheryl Belinsky from Cornell, New York State Co-op Extension, Kristen Maley, president of the Good Shepherd Food Bank in Maine, and Matt Chin, president of Harvesting Good, a subsidiary of Good Shepherd up in Maine. Well, Americans love broccoli, love broccoli. It's the sixth most popular vegetable. Retail sales are over $1 billion, and kids eat broccoli. Yet, it's been nearly impossible to overcome the production, logistics, manufacturing, and the pricing obstacles to get frozen broccoli onto farm-to-school menus as a regular item. To get them on the menu as more than just a small-scale, limited, rather expensive item that only lasts a short period of time. This panel is about our search to find that scaled-up, affordable frozen broccoli solution. It all starts at the end of something else, the Eastern Broccoli Project, which is a 10-year multi-land grant research project that was based at Cornell University, led by a plant geneticist named Thomas Bjorkman. And the project aimed at developing broccoli varieties that could withstand our perilous heat and humidity, the heat and humidity of an Eastern summer. At the end of their decade of research, the Eastern Broccoli Project hired Red Tomato to research ways to expand the market opportunities for local broccoli. We established a three-way partnership, the Eastern Broccoli Project plus Red Tomato, plus the Hudson Valley Agribusiness Development Corporation, which is an economic development organization who specializes in agriculture. Our study was funded by Empire State Development, the lead economic development funder in the New York State, and their main interest is job creation and investment opportunities. So for 15 months in 2020 into the early parts of 21, four of us, Cheryl Belinsky and Alessandra Cancelosi, Susanna Hinman, and me from Red Tomato chased this question. Is there an opportunity for New York growers and marketers to invest in broccoli production and distribution as a way to diversify and strengthen their businesses while adding jobs, dollars, and resilience to the local economy and to rural communities? We focused on both fresh broccoli and frozen. Today, our story is about frozen. If you're shaking your head in disappointment and you want to know all about fresh broccoli, I got two things to offer you. One, you can read the final report, which is available on the Cornell website, and Cheryl's going to paste the link into the chat box. Two, we at Red Tomato are planning to present a webinar during the winter, which will include and go deep into the fresh broccoli story, with a lot of focus about what food hubs and mid-sized growers can do to buy, sell, market, and process more fresh broccoli. So if you're interested in that webinar, send a note to Alessandra Cancelosi at Red Tomato. Cheryl, could you also paste or my email address into the chat box? Actually, that would be quicker and faster. And let us know, and we'll invite you. Now, I want to set the stage. First, there's already an Eastern U.S. broccoli sector, and it produces about $100 million a year. You can find Eastern broccoli in almost all supermarkets along the Eastern seaboard. So that 100 million, that may sound like a lot, but it actually represents a pretty small fraction of U.S. broccoli consumption. It means that in the East here, we are still importing 85 to 90% of all the broccoli that we consume. And it comes from California and Mexico mainly, with a small but increasing amount coming from Canada. Difficult emerging conditions out west did not cause the emergence of Eastern broccoli. 3,000 miles on a truck and the associated transportation costs are what made room for Eastern broccoli. And then hard, risky work by farmers and produce entrepreneurs who spent 20 to 30 years figuring out how to get the Eastern product into very tightly controlled markets. However, difficult emerging conditions like drought from climate change and water shortage, labor scarcity, and unreliable transportation are making room for ever more Eastern broccoli production. So the door is cracking open some more. And if there's more opportunity today to expand the local broccoli sector than there was yesterday, what are the obstacles in the way? Why is local frozen broccoli so hard to get right? Why is it so hard to scale up? Cheryl Belinsky, the next speaker, has been working on this for many years. She's going to give you a New York farm to school perspective on these questions. I'm going to be timing my colleagues, and my announcer is a duck quacking. So if you hear that quack, that means the speaker has 3 minutes left. Take it, Cheryl.
Great, thanks, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I did drop the report link in the chat box as well as Michael's email. And I want to give a shout out to Alessandra, who's actually in our audience today. This is as much her work as ours. So can I just get a thumbs up for my speakers? Can you guys see Thomas? Okay, great. So Michael walked you through some of this, so I'm going to skirt through these slides pretty quickly. This is our project director for the Eastern Broccoli Project. He's been dubbed the Broccoli Man, probably because he's been working on this for nearly 11 years now, and probably long before the SCRI grant. I'll drop the website later if you want to learn more about it. But the three key aspects of the broccoli report were breeding, on-farm production support, and market development. So the report that we are going to reference here today is a component of that market development side. So second, twice, there we go. So the point of this slide is just to give you an overview of East Coast acreage for broccoli by state. And this is based on 2017 Ag Census data, with the exception of Maine and Florida. We used Eastern Broccoli Project data because the numbers for the Ag Census data we knew were low. So Maine grows the lion's share of broccoli on the East Coast. Florida is second to that. And then the rest of the states you see really are growing 1,000 or less, with a handful of the New England states being less than 3% collectively. So that includes Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. So right now, broccoli production is not commanding a ton of acreage across the East Coast, with the exception again of Maine and Florida. So Michael talked a bit about this, the market for frozen broccoli. We historically were not an import market, and as Michael mentioned, we now are very much an import market. So by 2019, sorry, only 9% of broccoli intended for the frozen market was grown domestically. 91% was imported. And again, that's from Mexico, Guatemala, and Ecuador. So what we explored in our report is the farm to institution of your choice frozen broccoli opportunity. We explored a lot of other things as well, but that's what we're here talking about today. And we really focused on the school institution specifically for a number of different reasons. So we can start by saying that local fresh broccoli is not available year round on the East Coast. That kind of goes without saying, but we can't grow it year round. But institutions use a lot of it. And as Michael mentioned, kids love broccoli, and we actually have data that supports that. So the USDA specifically purchased 9.6 million pounds of frozen broccoli in 2019 for use in child nutrition programs, which is that acronym CNPs. And that came from California and Michigan. We see opportunity with child nutrition programs, or schools, whatever you want to call them, for a couple different reasons. I mentioned that it is largely an import market, but schools in particular are required to buy American, and that's through the Buy American provision. There's a few exemptions to that. I don't think broccoli would qualify for either of the exemptions that exist, so they have to buy broccoli that was grown in the United States domestically. So there's opportunity there in a way that doesn't exist with some other institutions. And there's a handful of state purchasing initiatives right now that are incentivizing the purchase of locally grown items. So we have a robust program in New York State. We're going into our 4th year. It's called the 30% New York Initiative. And we have seen a lot of school food dollars directed to New York food products. And that definition includes raw products, but also processed products. So for example, a frozen broccoli product would count towards our purchasing initiative, assuming 51% of the batch was from New York. And that sourceability point is something that we pondered a lot, and it is an important thing that I'll come back to. But again, why we think there's so much opportunity on the school food side of things. I'm going to show you a couple pie charts, and then I'm just going to give you what the math, I'm not expecting you to do the math here, but we were interested to see how much broccoli schools used with their entitlement dollars, right? So this is like the monopoly money that they get, and they can spend on USDA foods or fresh produce to the Department of Defense favors program. And so this shows you how many fresh florets that they buy. And again, I'm not going to ask you to do the math. I'm going to do all this for you. And we looked at data from 1819 because it was the last school year prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic disrupted what was purchased and what was served in schools considerably. Then we look at how much they spent on frozen broccoli florets. New York is obviously the largest in each of these, and we only have data for the 6 New England states plus New York. That's why you don't see any of the other East Coast states here. But New York is obviously the largest of those states. And so collectively, they spent $3.2 million on nearly 2 million pounds of broccoli florets. Now that's a combination of fresh and frozen, though frozen had a higher spend total. Now, this is just to demonstrate potential opportunity. We go into the report, we go into a lot more detail. We obviously don't know how much they're spending of their school food dollars. There's no way to track that. This data is all available through the government, so we were able to look at it. And we don't have this granular level of detail for any other institution, unfortunately. But again, it demonstrates the opportunity on the school food side of things. So kind of here we are at in our report. Again, kids love broccoli. It's easy to prepare by institutions, which is why it's one of the reasons it's appealing. It works in a lot of recipes. We've got purchasing incentives in New York and a couple other New England states. They're all set up a bit different, so the details do matter there. While we don't have a ton of acreage in our 6 New England states plus New York, with the exception of Maine, we now have varieties that are tolerant to East Coast growing conditions. That's a good thing. So we arguably could see more broccoli put into production. So these are all great things, but obviously broccoli is very seasonal. It's only harvested in during a few windows throughout the early summer months and late summer months. And so how do we start talking about supplying local broccoli to institutions when it's available for certain windows? And one of those windows is frankly when schools largely aren't in operation. They're closed for summer. And this is one of the things that we kept coming up to, and what we dubbed in our report as the local frozen broccoli bottleneck. And so I'm actually going to read this because I think it was really well worded. I think this was Michael's wording. I mean, it really defines what we were up against in our study. And this is the absence of manufacturing infrastructure in capacity that is willing and able to freeze and package locally grown broccoli with efficiency and scale enough to produce year-round supply and competitive pricing for both institutional and retail markets. So the things that really stand out there, again, like the answer to seasonality could be freeze it, then you have it all year. But how do you do that in such a way that there's scale, that it's efficient? Because we're really competing with a commodity market here. How do you handle year-round supply, or do you handle year-round supply? If you don't, you better have a lot of storage or buyers that are ready to take it right away. How do you handle competitive pricing for both institutional and retail markets? These are, at least on the institutional side, highly price sensitive markets. And so this is what we kept coming up against. And we spoke with all of these folks because we have processors in New England and New York of frozen vegetables. That's what they do. We have them on a very small scale and we have them on a very large scale. So Bonduelle, for example, is one of the largest companies in the world that processes vegetables. They're almost too big. And then on the flip side, we have a couple small processors, again, in comparison, Farmbridge and Valley Vegetables that are doing this. But how do we move past that little bit to get at the potential market demand that's out there? And so one thing that's important that really stood out to me in our report is when we interviewed Jim Hyland from the Farm Bridge, who got out of IQFing local vegetables. And we have him quoted as saying, it's not practical, not profitable, and doesn't work. And they were doing it on a small scale, and they tried really, really hard. And they just couldn't make the economics work out, and probably the logistics as well. So we did a lot of pondering. These are the things that we thought about in this. So we knew to capitalize on the values-based market segment, the product has to at least be source identified. But what's local? Who defines it? Does it have to be from a specific state? Depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers to that question. I can tell you in New York, it has to be from New York because that's what our purchasing incentive is tied to. Except for Maine, New York, and New England states aren't growing thousands upon thousands of acres. So how do we amass enough volume to achieve economies of scale while staying true to number one? So what if we were to aggregate all of the broccoli from all these different states? I hear the duck. We still have to stay true to number one. So in New York, we still need 51% of that to be from New York. Who can produce a cost competitive frozen source identified product? What's the right size of the business? It can't be too small. We found that it almost can't be too big because they're not necessarily interested in parsing out local. Like they're just working on large volumes. So ultimately, the price has to be competitive with broadliners and USDA foods for the product to command a meaningful market share. Again, not just capture a tiny little bit of the isn't this nice, we should do it market. And lastly, what transportation shed makes economical sense when we're considering trucking costs? And so we've been thinking about this a lot, particularly with this potential partnership in Maine. Is this a state-specific program? Is it interstate? Again, in New York, how far can New York product travel to and come back from and still make economical sense? Because we need our product to be processed. We also need it to come back to us, and it can't cost too much in that process. So these are all the things that we were thinking about as a part of this process. And we would argue that the demand side for the frozen local broccoli from the institutional market definitely shows promise. We kind of talked about that. We break it down even further in the report. But what about the production side? We learned from speaking with a lot of partners that producing frozen local broccoli, particularly using IQF technology, is not for the faint of heart. It requires a large and reliable supply of frozen broccoli, sizable investments in infrastructure, skilled labor, high volume, and committed customers. And I will tell you, at this point, we had pretty much given up that we would find an entity that would be able to get us what we needed, that source identified, values driven, and be able to kind of meet all of the challenges that we have presented here. And then it came really at the right time. We learned about Good Shepherd and what they had going on and how serendipitous it was. They were focusing specifically on broccoli, and all we were thinking about is broccoli. So with that, it's a perfect segue for me to pass this off to Kristen. I'm going to stop sharing and pass the mic over to Kristen to talk us through the great things that are going on up in Maine that we hope New York can capitalize on if it makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, I'm going to do the same thing. You guys can see in here. Okay, great. So thanks, Cheryl, for queuing that up. And I'm first just going to start with just a very basic overview just of who Good Shepherd Food Bank is for those of you who may not know, and why on earth would a food bank get involved in a food processing venture. We are the food bank for the state of Maine. We are the largest hunger relief organization. And our core work is that we are essentially a grocery store. We source healthy food and distribute it to hundreds of food access programs across the state. So our partners include food pantries, meal sites, shelters, schools, healthcare organizations, and other community-based programs that are on the front lines, giving food out to neighbors in need. And our job is to get them the food they need to do their work. But in addition to the core work that food banks do that many of you are likely familiar with, we also pioneered a local food purchasing program called Mainers Feeding Mainers. We started this program in 2010 in response to the growing demand for fresh produce from our network. And we wanted to try to keep our purchasing dollars local to support local farmers and rural communities. The program means we forward contract with farmers to produce food for us. We enter into MOUs ahead of the growing season where we agree on a price and a volume. It's usually around a wholesale price, but we allow the agreements to be flexible, especially as the growing season unfolds. So if a carrot crop is a total bust, but there's a ton of acorn squash that year, then we'll swap it out and just take whatever the farmer has for us. And we'll even be flexible on the price if just growing conditions change and the price that we thought we could have earlier were no longer feasible for the farmer. The program has worked really, really well for us and for farmers. The program has now grown to include 80 farms across the state. Over the past 12 months, we distributed 2.3 million pounds of local food through the program. It's mostly produce from farmers, but it does also include grains, seafood, and dairy products as well. The COVID-19 pandemic definitely brought unprecedented attention to the issue of hunger. The food bank is almost entirely funded with private philanthropic dollars, and Mainers definitely responded incredibly generously. So after decades of being very under-resourced, the food bank is experiencing something new, which is actually having adequate resources to not only just invest in short-term solutions for ending hunger, but to invest in long-term issues to get at the root causes of why hunger exists in the first place. So we are right now in very solid financial footing. And for many of you who may not have been to the food bank, we're held to the same food safety standards of any major food business. And we have extensive warehousing and distribution capability that you would expect from any other food distribution business. So through our Mainers Feeding Mainers program, we've become very well connected to the agriculture sector in Maine, and we've learned a lot about the issues and the opportunities about surrounding regional food systems. We've become connected and aligned with the New England Food Vision Plan, and we absolutely embrace the role that Maine can play in helping to achieve this vision. We believe Maine can once again become a food exporting state to the Northeast, which will also spur economic development for our rural communities. And we see this as a critical lever for ending hunger in Maine. Again, I probably don't need anyone to convince anyone who's on this this conference, but the demand for local food. But I just keep the slide up just in case there are some doubters in the audience. But the bottom line is that consumers are increasingly conscious of their food purchases and are demanding more local food. But right now, the fruit and vegetable consumption of local can really only be supported during the region's very short growing season. It also limits the commitments that institutions can make to being local when there's a limited availability to consume local products outside of the growing season. Now, for the food bank, we have a bold goal that by 2025, all food insecure Mainers will have access to the healthy food they need when and where they need it. And this means needing to source approximately 48 million pounds of food. We're currently sourcing about 38 million pounds, so we need to find an additional 10 million pounds to meet this need. And our traditional sources of food are mostly flat or declining. We see local produce as a huge opportunity. Our farmers tell us they can grow more for us, but we're limited to how much fresh food we can move during the growing season. We are inundated with produce in the fall, but then we need to be able to extend that shelf life so that we can have that local produce available all year round. So this was something that we've been looking at for quite some time, trying to figure out who can process this food for us. And of course, we came across what Cheryl came across, is that there really aren't great options for food processing in the New England area. But throughout this, we became connected with Maine's blueberry industry. Now, many of you, when you think about Maine, you think about lobsters, maybe potatoes, but blueberries are big business here too. However, with the introduction of mass cultivated blueberry growers around the globe, it has created unprecedented competition and price pressure on the Maine wild blueberry industry, despite their attempts to really differentiate the benefit of the wild blueberry. And I'm going to promote our Maine wild blueberries. They taste better and they're better for you than the cultivated brands. So check them out. But our Maine blueberry processors have massive IQF freezing and packaging operations that are largely unutilized outside of the blueberry season. They employ mostly seasonal workers, and they operate within some of the poorest communities in the Northeast. So having an opportunity to extend workforce was definitely high on the blueberry processors' interests as well. Maine farmers also have a number of challenges. Even though they're located on some of the most arable land in the eastern half of the country, Maine farms tend to be smaller, less mechanized, And really, apart from potatoes and blueberries, they really only grow for the fresh market, which limits their growth opportunities. It's well established that Maine farmers could benefit from having a process channel to sell into, but as we said, there's no large scale opportunity here in Maine. There have been some attempts to work to try to start, again, the smaller scale, but they failed for a variety of reasons, lacking food operational expertise, being undercapitalized, not being able to scale quickly enough. So working with our blueberry partners, we said, rather than start something from the ground up, why don't we leverage what we already have? So we want to leverage the blueberry processors' freezing and packaging assets, as well as their operational expertise. In addition, they have existing supply chain integration with key retailers and distributors. The food bank has extensive food storage and distribution assets and expertise, as well as the ability to secure funding for a project like this. And we have a long-term relationship with Hannaford, who essentially helped found the food bank 40 years ago and remains our largest donor to this day. With going through the food bank, we have the opportunity to create a mission branded product that allows consumers to support local farms while also contributing to ending hunger work in their community. So we created Harvesting Good, which is a for-profit public benefit corporation wholly owned by Good Shepherd Food Bank. It's stated in the Articles of Incorporation, the mission is not to maximize shareholder value, but to improve access to nutritious food for people in need and to strengthen regional food systems in the Northeast. We believe it makes sense for the food bank to own the entity because no one driven by profit is going to go into this business. You need to have reasons beyond financial gain. Our goal, and we believe we've modeled that we will break even at a minimum, but will likely generate a small profit that we will use to subsidize the product for food banks in the region. So how it will work is Harvesting Good will invest in the additional equipment to allow blueberry processors, W.R. Allen and Wyman's, to expand their current fruit processing facilities to be able to accommodate vegetable processing. Vegetables will be sourced from local farmers. The end product will be sold to retail and institutional customers. First product is going to be broccoli, because Maine grows a lot of broccoli, as Cheryl mentioned, and the season begins immediately after blueberry season. So there's no need to shut down the equipment. We can go right into the next product. And again, net profits from the company will be used to subsidize the frozen produce to food banks around the Northeast. All right, so our goals for this project is first to get a new channel of low or no cost healthy food for the food bank, to increase distribution of local healthy food year round, to get a more ready to eat product for seniors and people with disabilities who we serve a lot of, having a product that is already kind of cut and cubed up for you, and enable partners who are open less frequently to hand out more produce to clients because the produce will have a longer shelf life.
Kristen,
Well,
2-minute warning. I don't know what happened to my duck, but 2.
That's all right. I'm good. I'm just about done. And we also are committed to this because this will help connect local food with low-income consumers, improving access to healthy food for the most marginalized communities. Institutional sales will go to K through 12 schools, hospitals, correctional facilities, and retail sales will provide an affordable product that is easily accessible to all consumers. So regardless of your income, to have year-round access to affordable local food at locations where people are already shopping. And then it will also create significant new sales channels for local growers who are currently constrained to selling only to the fresh market and primarily only in Maine. Strengthening farm business and adding to economic activity, especially again in some of our poorest communities, not only in Maine, but in all of New England. It will help strengthen the long-term viability of a fourth and a fifth generation Maine companies operating in rural Maine. And we think it will also help continue to build on Maine's reputation as a quality food producing state, contributing to the success of other Maine-based businesses. I'm just going to summarize our partners. We received early funding from the Kendall Foundation when we won the New England Food Vision Prize. We also have investments from some other grants that are listed there. Our key broccoli supplier at the moment is Circle B Farms, located in Caribou, Maine. Our 2 blueberry processors, W.R. Allen and Wyman's. And Hannaford's going to serve as our anchor retail customer. They've agreed to carry this product in all of their stores. And then Sodexo. Sodexo has been instrumental to this project from its origins more than 2 years ago. We've been working with Maeve McGinnis she helped us get that New England Food Vision Prize, which really helped launch the project. And she's helped secure Sodexo as our first institutional customer, committing to making this product available to their higher ed customers throughout New England. I'm now going to hand it off to my partner, Matt Chin, who is going to go into the details of how this is all going to work and give you an update on where we are as of today. So Matt, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kristen, for that, for that excellent summary. Let me see if I could share my screen. You see a state of Maine? Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Matt Chin, president of Harvesting Good, and I'm excited to share with you our initiative and our current status. Kristen spoke of the why, and I will speak to the how. Specifically, I will review the supply chain flow from farmer to processor to packager to customer, go over some of the financial realities of building a mid-scale processing business in Maine, and talk about markets, customers, and risks of starting this venture. Our plans are ambitious. We will sell 1 million pounds of frozen broccoli florets starting in the fall of calendar year 22, doubling to 2 million pounds in the next year, and then growing to 5 million pounds starting in the fall of calendar year 24. In year 3, we will introduce our second product, and our long-term goal is to have at least 6 products under the Harvesting Good banner. We believe we can achieve success due to the partnerships that we have established and our capacity to be at break-even scale in a few short years. So where does this all start? It all starts in Caribou at Circle B Farms. They will grow broccoli crowns, and the family has been growing broccoli for 3 generations. Aroostook County grows more than 50 million pounds per year due to its great soil, water, and abundant sunshine. After the crowns are harvested, they must be hydrocooled to remove field heat, which will preserve freshness, color, and taste. Next, the crowns will travel down to our processing center in Orland, Maine, to W.R. Allen. W.R. Allen is a 5th generation blueberry farmer and processor, doing about 1.5 million pounds of blueberries, all processed in the month of August, with the broccoli harvest starting in early to mid-September. As Kristen stated, they own their own IQF tunnel. IQF stands for Individual Quick Freezing, which is rated at 10,000 pounds per hour, and freezers that can store 3 million pounds of product. To accommodate the equipment needed only for broccoli, Harvesting Good will add an extension to their existing facility that will house 3 floret cutting machines, a blancher, and assorted support systems. Here is a good representation of the processing work that will be done at W.R. Allen. This will go from left to right. Crowns enter the system in bins from the farm and are first cut into florets. If you can see that small green box underneath the floret cutter, that box is to catch all of the broccoli stalks, which essentially is a waste product for us. Let me know if you have any use for broccoli stalks, and do I have a deal for you? Then the florets are washed to remove field material, quickly blanched, which is the 3rd piece of equipment, and cooled before going into the IQF tunnel, which is the one on the right, where they are frozen in about 8 minutes. Then they are stored in bulk to be shipped to our packager in Blois, Maine. Wyman's of Maine will package product for the retail market in 1 and 2 pound bags and in 2 pound and 5 pound bags for institutional customers throughout the year, and ship the final bag product to our customers' distribution centers. Wyman's of Maine is the largest processor of blueberries in the Northeast and is a future processor for harvesting good. Let's talk a little bit about the market. The retail and the institutional market size for New England is about the same, 14 million pounds of frozen broccoli florets each. Maine is only 10% of that total demand, so harvesting good must target New England markets in order to achieve scale. In the retail market, Hannaford is our anchor retail customer and is a long-term supporter of the food bank. They have committed to carry harvesting good as an independent brand in their 132 retail stores in the Northeast. They will also promote harvesting good to the other Ahold Delhaize banners, Stop and Shop, Food Lion, and Giant supermarkets. And harvesting good will also target independent retailers in the near future. On the institutional side, Sodexo has been a partner of harvesting good from the start and is our anchor institutional customer. They have committed to initially serve harvesting good products to their 46 university food service accounts in New England and will help broaden our exposure to other Sodexo markets such as K-12, healthcare, correctional institutions, and senior citizen centers. They are helping us build a relationship with Cisco and well as other food distributors. The institutional market has demonstrated a desire and need for increasing their local purchases, and they also serve food insecure populations in schools, prisons, and hospitals. Fortunately, Wyman's is an existing vendor to Hannaford and Sodexo and can easily distribute harvesting good packaged products to Hannaford and Sodexo's distribution centers along with their own products. We have found, and many have found, that produce processing has multiple steps with high operating costs and large capital equipment investments. We are fortunate to partner with W.R. Allen and Wyman's of Maine, as they have some, but not all, of the necessary equipment. For harvesting good to be successful, we must provide a high value product, and we will be competing with well-established large competitors. These competitors have a low cost basis and far larger financial assets. We will price our product at or near the competition. And as an example and reference, here are some market data from Hannaford's online shopping portals. One of our biggest financial levers is scale, which drives the only path to break even. We believe that break even can only be achieved at a volume in the 3 to 4 million pounds a year range. So what are the risks? Frankly, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. Here are some of those risks, the more impactful risks, and how we are addressing them. As many of you know, farming is essentially gambling with food and money. In the short term, Circle B Farm will overplan harvesting crowns to achieve the necessary harvest yield to sell to harvesting good. The long-term sustainable solution is to add other regional farmers located in different climate zones and growing different broccoli varieties. And that is a goal of harvesting good for the near future. W.R. Allen has never processed produce, but we will have the production equipment in place to be tested prior to the blueberry processing season in July that will identify production inefficiencies and will give us enough time to address them before our actual production starts in mid-September. We are addressing single points of failure, and currently that's one farmer and one processor. Over time, we will expand our partnerships and add a second processor and many more farmers. Thank you. Competition will be stiff. Harvesting good will promote locally sourced and locally processed product. We will share a very transparent supply chain. We will tout the benefits of this project, which will create jobs, invest in our food system, and support food insecure people, something that our competition cannot promote. Will we have a product that our customers prefer? We will be conducting a taste test at the University of Maine in Orono in a few short weeks. And as of today, have a small sample size of 4 Maine universities that have cooked and tasted Harvesting Good trial product and received high grades. So let me know if you want high quality, good tasting, locally grown and processed broccoli florets that are far more nutritious than what you are getting now from far, far away. We are looking for more partners to join us in advancing our local food system. Will you join us? Remember, production starts in late fall of 2022, and you can reach me either by email or by phone. I will now turn it back to Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for great, clear, on-time presentations. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of summary, closing up the presentation side, and then we're going to open this up wide. And I think we got a lot to talk about because I think a lot of people in this audience are working in farm to school settings or definitely working with local veg growers. So a few summary comments. Meanwhile, if you could be organizing your questions, you can throw them in the chat box or we can handle them live, which we will do in about 4 minutes. So you can see why it was exciting for us in this study to accidentally bump into Kristen and Matt. And we probably had another 8 or 9 successive interviews with them in order to really understand the inside of this project. But, you know, I'm thinking back on a bunch of conversations I've had over years with people in the food movement. I think sometimes when we imagine large scale projects, we're assuming that they're going to force us to compromise our dearest values. And I think sometimes when we imagine partnering closely with large companies, especially the largest global companies, the likes of Sodexo, Cisco, Hannaford, owned by Delhaize, owned by Ahold, that kind of automatically means giving up our agency and being swallowed up in the process. And so I want to give you a sense of what we saw in this project when we first met it on the road. We felt like there's real genius in the basic concept and the design. And you've heard this in Kristen's words, reinforced by Matt, and I want to reinforce them again. Putting underutilized assets to work is a big deal and a win-win if all goes well. Good Shepherd's not for-profit status, shared by many, if not most of us in this audience. It means that going to market is a different message to the public, to the customers. It's a different message to the partners. And you enter into business with a different set of assumptions and in some ways, maybe a little more trust in the operation. But I think it paves the way for partnership in a productive way. It also paves the way for funding, for investment. And I think Good Shepherd has done some extremely creative work to attract funds. This is apart from the extra financing that Kristen mentioned had to do with COVID. I'm just talking about their basic game plan. They're in the middle of a very ambitious capital raising campaign now, which if I get it right, I think it was conceived independent of COVID as kind of what they needed to end hunger in Maine. I think this project has an extraordinary story to tell. This is not your average buy our great tasting frozen broccoli. I mean, there's a lot more layered into it. And I think that all of us here actually in our partnerships step into that territory where if we can make all the pieces work, we come out with a really interesting story that the public is going to have a hard time not paying attention to and not signing up for. And then there are the strategic partnerships with the companies. And so the one with Hannaford is built on many, many years of experience, but so is the one with Sodexo. And I think that when you put all these things together, you do have the basis for a rather high chance of success. And, you know, when we first met this project, we were thinking of is this going to work? And Matt did a good job of talking about the vulnerabilities of the project. And we spent a lot of time talking with them about that, the single source or the limited source of production. But, you know, since we began these conversations, which was over a year ago, I think this project has done a really good job of addressing them. And so I'll end with the title, A Regional Local Frozen Broccoli Partnership. We think that if there's success down the road, that this is going to be a regional kind of a local project. And as amazingly as the kind of Maine-centric story is, I think equally interesting and exciting to some of the audience is going to be the regional side of it. And our sense is if it becomes regional, especially at the agricultural level, it's going to be a New York to Maine frozen broccoli partnership. So let's hear from all of you. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat box, so I'll open them up. But I also think if somebody wants to vocalize their question themselves, that's probably even better. So Ava, I was reading yours, but do you want to say it in your own words?
Sure, I will. I also have like 500 other questions. So in addition to being your tech support from NISOG, my name is Ava and I'm the director of Hope's Harvest, Rhode Island. So we're a farm-based food recovery organization down here that I started in 2018. And last year we started purchasing surplus in earnest with recovery funds from COVID and have been fiscally sponsored by Farm Fresh Rhode Island, which has some small processing infrastructure and is looking to build out larger processing infrastructure. We've also, this was our first year getting a contract from the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, and I know they've reached out to you and spoken to you a little bit about the program that you're running as well. And that contract with the food bank was a really big deal this year and really made a big difference for us in terms of being able to have some earned income as a program. So my first question, which was just a little bit more of like a nerdy curiosity kind of question, and then maybe I'll ask the 20 other questions that I have after other people have a chance. But my nerdy curiosity question is, I noticed that one of the competitive brands that you had up on that slide was Hannaford's and their store brand. And wondering if they're concerned about supporting a competitor, or are they interested in bringing your product into the store brand packaging?
Matt, you want to
That's
take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks, Ava. The plan originally was for Harvesting Good to be the source for Hannaford's private brand and essentially replace their current supplier. We are taking the route of being an independent brand for hopefully only 1 year, in which we can prove to them that we are a reliable supplier of high quality. And then once they have that data point, then we will begin the conversion. Hannaford is totally on board with the program. So we are very fortunate to have them as our anchor retail customer. Anything you want to add to that, Kristen?
Yeah, I'll just add that Hannaford absolutely has always been a supporter of the food bank, but also, we need to be recognized. They're a for-profit company that's owned by a larger company. So what's in it for them? They are facing unbelievable pressure, as you can imagine, from Amazon and other online grocers. They recognize their key differentiator that they can sell is local and supporting a local community, so that they really do see this not only as, gee, this is a good thing to do, but it's also a good thing for them to do for business wise as well.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Philabundance model, where they were doing the co-branded cheese, right? Where some of it was marketed in a very particular values focused way. And then that allowed them to provide this lower cost product. And the thing that we have a lot of in Rhode Island, or that we consistently seem to have a lot of, is butternut squash. And so one of my other questions, what's like butternut squash, apples, potatoes, those sort of key things. And one of my other questions was going to be like, what are some of your other products that you're thinking about moving forward?
Okay, we're gonna register that question because I think it's on many people's minds, but let's move to somebody else and then return to Ava in round two. So who else has a question that they want to vocalize? Raise your hand or jump in.
So Michelle had put in a question that was actually somewhat similar, I think, to Ava's.
It was. It
yeah.
sort of feeds right into that. So I'm an agricultural economist and always looking at farm budgets and how to, make everything line up. And so on that specialty or vegetable production, it's always, how can you get everything off the farm? And so looking more into some of the processing to, deal with the seconds. And so I thought it was interesting that the focus here was broccoli. And I'm wondering if the model works in your experience with just one crop, or if you do have to have multiple crops to sort of extend the season and have a better utilization of your fixed assets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, you want to tell them about what our wonderful blancher can do?
Yes. So the blancher is expensive. We would prefer not to buy a dedicated blancher for each product. Our current blancher can blanch, I think the list is 25 different types of produce. So we believe we have a very generic, very flexible piece of equipment that could be used for product 2, 3, 4, 5, and beyond. Clearly, the Floretta is somewhat specialized and will be used for both broccoli and cauliflower. If we were to do corn, we're going to need to invest in either if we're going to do carrots, we need to invest in a carrot coiner or whatever product we need. But anything past the pre-cutting stage, we believe that our current investment can be used and used quite effectively for other products. And as you mentioned, we hope to have, let me say it differently. One of the requirements for product 2, 3, 4, and 5 is that the harvest time does not conflict either with broccoli or with blueberries.
Matt, what does a piece of equipment like that cost, that kind of a blancher?
I think the blanch is about $450,000.
Yeah. And I think, let's see how the questions go, but, returning to the cost of this kind of a venture is interesting. Normally, I think small organizations are not thinking on that scale. But there's also a way in which when you bring in the partners, suddenly things begin to make sense and actually feel like it may actually be less risky to undertake some of these things at the larger scale than to try to patch them together at the smaller scale. And I know one of the bits of news that came in as we were prepping up for this was that, Cheryl, I think you're the one who told me, or that we learned that Farmbridge actually in the Hudson Valley closed its doors. One of the small scale vegetable processors that had been really just trying every possible imaginable way to structure, restructure, refinance, re-equip and everything to do this at a small scale. Yeah. Other questions?
Mm-hmm. you want us to just to take the ones in the chat?
Yes.
So yeah, so the prices that we negotiate with the farmer is, it's essentially, it's a wholesale price. So, our farmers, we don't expect them, they need to make money from this, and they need to be able to have a viable business. So we don't go to, we didn't do this with our Mainers Feeding Mainers program, and we'll not do this with Harvesting Good, is we said from the get-go, this only works if everybody can earn the margin they need to earn to be a viable and sustainable business. And so that's the negotiation we go into with our farmer. And so we were able to find a price. And we anticipate that the price will be the end price will be competitive with other brands that people are currently buying. And again, Cheryl and Michael helped us figure that one out. And I'm going to see, in terms of, you mean from the food bank? Yeah, the prices vary. We also even vary our pricing with the different farmers we work with. And this kind of addresses Brian's question about for Mainers Feeding Mainers. And again, we want to use the same model with Harvesting Good. We buy from really big growers, and then we buy from really small growers, and our price changes because obviously their margins, their business is different, and we want all those businesses to be successful. So we pay a higher price point to our smaller farmers than we do to our larger farmers. So what we shoot for is a blended price point that works for our model. And that's what we'd like to do with Harvesting Good. We're starting obviously with just one farm because we need to minimize the variables in the early years. But the goal is that we're able to include other farmers, some that may not be on the scale that Circle B Farms is at, and then again, come up with a blended price point that makes the business model viable.
Kristen, to put a finer point on it, in throughout this study, we found that wholesale broccoli was kind of moving in a range of somewhere in the kind of $14 to $22 range per bushel. And now, Kristen, I don't know if you've been doing your pricing on a per pound basis or in a bushel basis, but in the fresh market, it's so farms that were producing hundreds of acres of broccoli that were shipping, partial containers into supermarkets were comfortable receiving $14 to $16 a bushel. And it at times dropped down to like 12. But growers that you might consider mid-size or small growers were really wanting to earn in that kind of $20 to $24 range. And if everything went well in the efficiency, there were great efficiencies in processing, maybe they could stomach 18 or 19 and put it on deal or something. But I think that was the range. Does that ring true to you, Kristen and Matt?
I hate to say, I don't know the conversion between a bushel and a pound.
Okay. Roughly 20. Anyway, you know what? Let's move on. Let's move on from there. Some of the other questions here. So Brian also asks, can you process for smaller grower co-ops for their own value-added sales?
And the answer is yes. That might take us a year to be able to find additional capacity where we are running the IQF tunnel at something less than fully optimal to achieve the cost that we need. We need to link the throughput of the farm and the processor such that the IQF tunnel is on for 15 hours continually a day. That's what's going to keep the cost low. And to Kristen's point is once we achieve that and we have some time, we can be able to run the processing plant far less efficiently and be available to smaller farmers for much smaller runs. We have to get to a point where that first farmer is running well and the processing plant is running efficiently, and then we will invite other farmers to join us.
So I have another question which builds, Matt, on your call to action. You were saying if people want to get involved, that you want to know. And I'm wondering, because so many people, in the NESOG network are active in their own farm to school worlds. Can you paint a picture for really what it would mean to get involved? Let's say even in test year is going to be fall. It's going to be a year from now. The initial products are going to roll out. And I don't know if kind of the proof of concept moment is really the right time for other people to get involved. So the question is, when realistically could someone who wanted to get their hands on some high quality, regionally grown, affordable frozen broccoli, when is that realistic? And how would that work? Would it be through an agent like Sodexo? Would it be something to work out with you and you'd figure out the right way that they could have access to the product?
Great question. With our current schedule, we will have broccoli florets bagged available for distribution probably in late October and going out for the next 12 months. Harvesting Good, although we have access to some tractor trailers of Good Shepherd Food Bank, the best way to distribute the product is through Cisco, PFG, US Foods. And that will first require me to build a relationship with them and get Harvesting Good product in their catalog, which then means any school that buys from those food distributors can place an order for Harvesting Good product. And it is my hope to have those relationships in place before October 2022.
And if you do work with them, I think you as their customer asking, hey, are you going to carry this, would certainly help us too. So would appreciate that.
Thank you.
That-
I'm curious, Matt and Kristen, are you going to do any direct bidding or delivery to institutional partners, or is your pathway, is it preferred to go through the broadliners and the food service management companies, however they're managed?
Our initial preference is to go through those broadline food distributors. The
Makes sense.
challenge of doing the distribution is unique to the end customer. We really don't know what that is. If there would be a customer that has a high volume need that takes monthly deliveries and is relatively close to the packing facility, we might consider it, but preference would be to either have Wyman's do our distribution or those large food distributors that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But there are always exceptions.
Yeah. And I think especially as we said in the first year, just trying to minimize how many variables we're working with. And if we can simplify distribution in the first year just to get up and running and stabilize, that would be ideal. But we also need to meet our pounds minimum. We need to get to 1 million pounds too. So that's what we're juggling. So I would say if you're interested in getting broccoli from us, let Matt know, and then we'll start talking and seeing what can work. Is that fair, Matt?
Yes, it is.
So let's swing back to Ava's second question, which is take us through your diversification plan beyond broccoli. And I know at this point, it's not a detailed plan with deadlines and all that on it, but what are you thinking and what are the tea leaves telling you about what comes after broccoli?
So there are several leading candidates. Other decision criteria would be, does a product grow well in the Northeast? A clear one. And the second one, which is also quite obvious, is there a significant demand for frozen version of that product? The most critical one is the timing of the harvest. And can we find a product that is harvested after broccoli or before blueberries? That's going to be the key constraint in adding on. With that said, that criteria makes root vegetables like carrots probably would put them higher on the list, only because we can store carrots once they're harvested in an outdoor hoop house without any refrigeration and without the carrots really losing any quality, nutritional value, crispness, or any of the qualities that the end consumer would want. And that would allow us to delay processing that until after broccoli. We've thought of corn, cauliflower, carrots, green beans. But frankly, we haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about a firm decision yet. All of our focus is on broccoli florets at this moment. And with all of the relationships that we are building with potential customers, the Hannafords of the world and the Sodexos of the world, we will clearly use their inputs to help us determine what product number 2, 3, and 4 are.
It occurs to me that a venture like this being launched in a community of organizations like this is really unique. And that I think yet to be tested is the power of a network to unclog plumbing clogs and to facilitate relationships. And I think in a year, maybe the power of that network will just begin to reveal itself. But I hope, Kristen and Matt, that you will remember that this session will kind of be for you just a kind of a reminder that, we may actually have friends in central Pennsylvania or in Western Mass or in Eastern New York or in, and I actually think there's real action there. There's another.
Absolutely, Michael. There are a lot of things that keep me up late at night, at usually 4 o'clock or 6 in the morning. Thinking about all of this stuff, and I am continually comforted by the fact of we have so many experts and so many people who are invested in fixing this and getting this thing right, that there are multitudes of people for me to go and ask for help. And that is something that I do quite often and with great results. So this organization will be one source of assistance and consultation.
And Cheryl, I know, for you, speaking of clogs and bottlenecks, I mean, your state on the one hand has done some really progressive things to support this kind of flow, but you've also run into some real clogs. And I'm just wondering if you feel okay sharing just kind of some of your bewilderment at, you're in a state with, like, there's 1.4 million people in Maine, is that right? Or 1.3? And I think you've got a few more than that in New York. So give us maybe just a picture of what's been your experience and how you think this project might shake things loose a little.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're specifically talking, and I'm sorry, my kids came home from school, so they're going to be chattering in the background. But specific to the frozen side, I mean, it's the bottleneck that we talked about in the report. I mean, we have Bonduelle in New York State. They are very important to our food system, our local food system, even though they are I think they're one of the top 15 vegetable processors globally. But they contract with farmers who grow thousands of acres. They're very important to the fabric of our local food system. But they operate at such a large scale that asking them to source identify and asking them to do batches for just New York, I mean, they haven't said it explicitly, but I have to think it doesn't make good business sense. And then on the other end of it, we've had food banks look into this, possibly doing exactly what Good Shepherd is doing. We don't have a Wyman's, to be fair. We don't have underutilized assets that we know about that we're able to run. And I think that is a real asset of something that you have up in Maine that we have not been able to uncover in New York. And so we've had small companies try and give it their best effort and then some, but operating on a small scale, for all the reasons we talked about, they can't make the economics work. And we're talking about highly price sensitive markets when we're talking about school food, and we're talking about frozen products in this particular case. So it helps with seasonality, of course, but these are products that they can get from broadliners, they can get through their USDA food program. they have access to this. The frozen broccoli is not something new. Local frozen broccoli is something new. But the numbers have to work, and we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that happen yet. So I think we've got the big, we've got the small, and we haven't found that processor in the middle, which we talk about in the report, that we need to be able to tie these pieces together, and that frankly cares about our values. So we're a values-driven, local food system here in New York State, like we are across the Northeast. And we haven't met a partner yet that is values driven and is willing to do all that extra work. So I don't know if that answer, I mean, it's not unique to New York. We have a lot of, go ahead.
One of the avenues that we explored together, we just kind of roughed it out, would be that down the road, as the production side wants or needs to diversify, the possibility of New York grown broccoli becoming one of the many sources for harvesting good is not impossible.
We
Right,
hope not.
I think, well, I think there's a lot of, the devil is in the detail here, and it's really about how is the process cooled before it's transported, but the distances inside the state of Maine are great. So harvesting good is going to be shipping broccoli for hours from one point to the processing point, and the distance from parts of New York are clearly longer, but they're not astronomically longer. So I just remember we raised that as a possibility. And Cheryl, I remember you saying if 50% or more of the broccoli in the package is New York grown, then it will qualify for all the state subsidies.
Yeah, so it's 51, that 1% matters, percents matter. So it has to be 51%. And so that's why when we talk about this, the source identification, I spent 10 years working on local food systems in Buffalo. Local food it's an interesting construct when you're talking about product coming from New York, and it could be coming 300 miles across the state, or just buying it from Ohio, which is like right there. But for us in our state, our procurement incentive is a state incentive, and it's tied to the state of origin. And so in order for that product to qualify, and I know we talked about this a lot in the report, and we continue to talk about it with Good Shepherd and Harvesting Good, our end output has to be 51% New York, or else I can't say no schools will buy it, but they have access to it through the USDA for free with that monopoly money. They can buy it from the broadliners very cost competitively. Why are they going to buy it from somebody else if it doesn't qualify for our incentive? And so I think that is an important construct that comes into play. And again, other New England states have purchasing incentives too. They're just set up a bit differently. So the devil is very much in the details. How much does it cost to go up to Maine and come back to New York?
Yep. So there's a question that I think is going to land first on Kristen's desk. It's about making the case for funders. So the question is, when you make the case for funders, investors, do you include new jobs that will be created as a result of the model? And if so, how do you figure that out? I want to even just broaden that a little bit to say, tell us what the interaction with funders has been like, because you're not going asking for a $50,000 or that would be helpful, but you're posing a venture that's of a different scale. How are investors taking it, and what kinds of funders and investors do you find yourself conversing with now?
Yeah, so we have been including jobs in this, especially for a lot of the public grants that we've been applying for that are tied to, they want to see job development. And that's really Matt working with Circle B Farms and W.R. Allen to understand what they're going to need to invest in additional labor to make this work. And that's how we're calculating those jobs. We're also looking at using kind of the agricultural economic multiplier to understand what will be the total economic impact on the communities where the businesses will be invested in as well, and using something that was put out by the state of Maine several years ago about that agricultural economic multiplier. I would say though, and those tend to be more for the public investors, so the USDA grants and things like that. And we did successfully just get our first USDA grant just about 2 weeks ago. So we're excited about that. In terms of our traditional, more philanthropic investors, we've had a lot of conversations, and we're still waiting on someone to actually make the jump. And I think the biggest hesitation is to what you pointed out at the very beginning, Michael, which is that this is not a normal thing. You have a nonprofit owning a for-profit, investing in another for-profit. And so for what we're running into is some of the foundations that we're talking to, they have their grant making and they have their impact investing. And normally they're kind of separate. And this one kind of blends into both. And so we're bumping into kind of, I don't know how we're going to process this. Like, it's like they don't even know which team to give it to. But I will say the interest is incredibly strong. And the interest is this idea of it's building a sustainable business model that will actually generate economic activity while also having social benefits at the same time. I think that's really fundamentally what people are excited about. And I think the opportunity to have a meaningful impact on getting local food out there. There's, like we said, there have been dozens and dozens of amazing small scale work happening. But I think what we have seen is that if we really want to really meaningfully move the needle on getting local food out there, we need to step up the scale. And it hasn't been done yet. And so I think that's what's really exciting. It also then brings obviously a lot of risk to it. But I think I think we've mitigated that risk a lot by the quality of the groups that we're working with and the expertise we're tapping into.
Thanks. Other questions? Got one here about, we're probably reading the same one, Kristen, about does Hannaford require any food safety inspections on the farms that you're working with? I'm
Yeah, so
curious.
Hannaford does require their fresh producers to be GAP certified. I don't know, Matt, have they said if Circle, but I think Circle B already provides fresh product for Hannaford. So they
That's
already
correct.
are affected by Hannaford.
And they also provide food to Sodexo as well, so.
Yeah. So what I don't know is if when we get into these later years where we say we want to start working with these smaller farms to be another source, would they need to have that same certification? And we haven't clarified that with Hannaford. So that's something we'll need to find out.
Cool. So we can begin to wind down now. We do have time for another few questions. And I just wanted to pose, that this project has the ability to kind of overwhelm the creative mind because it's large and the investment is in the many millions and the partnerships are broad and deep. But I just wanted to remind everybody that when Matt gets up in the morning and he goes into his office, this is what I've heard from Matt. It's kind of lonely because Matt's not working with a staff of 9 people. He's doing a lot of this work on his own, utilizing support from Good Shepherd. And my point is, it's small organizations can piece together collaborations of this complexity. Like we can do these things. I mean, it's on the one hand, the leadership and the creativity up there in Maine is kind of awesome and very inspiring, but also really hard to imagine everywhere. But I think the point here is that small organizations can do this. We can orchestrate these kinds of collaborations slowly, methodically, learning from one another. And how long has this been in the works, Matt, Kristen?
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's changed and morphed 35 different times.
Yeah. And we'll probably do some more of that in the next year. Yeah. So I'm going to ask the panelists to just be thinking about whether you have any closing thoughts that we'll offer at the very end. Meanwhile, we have time for probably 2 more questions, if anybody's got them. Ava, that can include you. You've been a really good question asker. Do you have any more up your sleeve?
If I'm allowed and no one else has any questions, I will totally ask more questions. I certainly have them.
All right, we'll put you on hold for 15 seconds while we scan the horizon.
Another question, but I also asked one.
That's okay. Michelle, go for it.
So you've said that you've been having this conversation for a long time now, and I'm wondering if there's any other public forums or places where this conversation is happening. So instead of reinventing the wheel, like where is this all just private conversations you're having, or are there public forums for it?
Would you just define your this? Do you mean public-private collaborations? What about this are you kind of emphasizing?
Yeah, I mean, one would be the public-private collaborations, but two would be getting the parties together. It sounds like, you need the farmers and the processing and the food bank and the retailers in order to make that $450,000 minimum investment in the Blancher. So there's a lot of working pieces before you can make that kind of capital investment or raise that money. And that's what my this is.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'll say that this started, Ava alluded to, like, and Cheryl, I think also, that a lot of food banks were looking into processing, and that's where this started in earnest for us. I was part of the produce sourcing committee for Feeding America. And we got a grant from Feeding America to research the viability of food banks going into processing. And so that's what really launched us into having a lot of these conversations. And we found that it makes absolutely no sense for food banks to go into processing because it's far too expensive. But that's what introduced us to a lot of folks. In terms of the Hannaford and the Sodexo, and talking with the folks up in Caribou and W.R. Allen, those were all really just one-on-one conversations that Matt and I were having as we got introduced to different folks. Every time we met somebody, they'd make an introduction to the next person. And it was a lot of those conversations. We probably talked to over 50 people over the past 3 to 5 years. And it's how we were introduced to Michael and Cheryl and Alessandra from the Eastern Broccoli Project, which was amazing because once we talked to them, they kind of affirmed everything that we had been hearing, which was really helpful. And then they really helped us figure out, is our pricing going to be where it needs to be? And then I think the excitement of bringing in New York into what we thought was just a New England conversation. So we presented at the New England Food Vision forum before, the Farm to Institution New England. We presented there, and we presented at some Feeding America places as well. So again, we're just happy because we just find every time we talk or present, we learn something new or we get introduced to somebody else who's helpful. So it's been really great.
Other questions? Last call here before we give Ava the last question, but anyone else have one? Shout it out now. Ava, go for it.
Thank you so much. So I guess this might make more sense actually to take offline, but I'm curious about the pricing model that allows for donation to the food banks. And because I know that processed produce has really tight margins no matter what, and then to have a built-in additional sort of like cost of taking some proportion of that product out of the mix, and not necessarily having income from it, or are you planning on having income from it from the charitable? I'm curious about how you made that make sense. And
Yeah.
Maybe that's a spreadsheet and not a physical answer, but
I can explain high level. So one is, as you know, food banks already are buying food. And so we're already used to paying for food. And so we've already talked with our friends in New Hampshire and Vermont, who also are really committed to local, and they're already buying frozen food. And they said, if we can buy frozen food and know that it's helping the region, we'd rather buy it there. Again, as long as we can at least be in the realm of cost competitive, like they're not going to spend 5 times what they normally spend, but will they spend a little bit more? Yeah, they will, because they see the mission alignment. But then what we do see an opportunity though to subsidize it somewhat, again, because we do see this throwing off a positive cash flow a few years in. And at that point, the idea will be that any positive cash flow will go back to then subsidizing that product to food banks. So they'll still pay something, but maybe they'll get 25% off or something like that. That then becomes not only mission aligned, but also a really great deal for them as well. And we anticipate that there's going to be product I mean, we see this with other food banks that have food manufacturing facilities in their service area. There's always food waste in a manufacturing facility, and that food waste is perfectly good food. It's the broccoli florets that didn't quite make it, the broccoli florets weren't the right size or things like that. So we anticipate opportunities and things like that too.
Great. Closing words from any of the panelists? Anything you want to share as you breathe out and go back to your regular job? Anything, Matt?
Yeah, I'll share something, and it might have been touched on before, but Kristen and I, through our 4 to 5 year journey, talking to different people about different iterations of this model, we have universally been received with great surprise and saying, wow, you're really going to go do this? And then we ask her, so do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it's going to work? And everybody has said yes. I think we all realize that it isn't easy, and if it was easy, it would have been done before. But I look at the success of Harvesting Good. It's going to be based on the foundation of all of the experience and support and networking of the hundreds and hundreds of people that we spoke to. Collectively, we can get this thing done, and it is the thing that allows me to go back to sleep again at 5:30 in the morning when I'm thinking about all of these problems, because there are experts who know far more about processing, sales, marketing, logistics, branding, UPC codes, trademarks than the guy that has the title of President of Harvesting Good. So it's really not what you know, but who you know. And the group of cohorts that we have spoken to and we will be speaking to in the future only grows, and the expertise is wide and deep. And it is through this coordinated effort that we will be successful. I'm very convinced of that.
Thank you. Kristen and Cheryl, you have 15 seconds if you want to spend it.
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, I want to say thanks as well. And I want to thank the audience for the great questions. Sometimes these audiences are crickets, although I'm not usually in the local food system world, but your questions were great and I appreciate them.
And I want to thank Susanna Hinman and Alessandra Cancelosi again for all of your research work that made this possible. And for all of you in the audience for hanging in there. So put November 1 on your calendars, 2022, with a reminder, where's my frozen broccoli? Thank you all.